Welcome, everyone. I'm Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club of America. I'm in New York. Most of the panelists will be in Ukraine. Jim, I believe you're in Massachusetts. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So we're delighted today to have our second program on Ukraine, organized by OPC member Jim Brooke, who has extensive experience as a journalist there. And our first program was just a few days before Russia invaded. It was that very week, a couple days before. So it's useful now to have another program with people who are there on the ground who can give us some insights into what's going on. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and the speakers will make comments first, and then we can take the questions. And please identify yourself if you can in your questions. So with that, Jim, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Excellent, great. Patty, thanks so much. And it's great to have Dan Bilak here and Andy Bain. And I see Andrii has joined us. Wonderful, Andrii Osadchuk. The theme, as Patty said, we did have a conference literally 3 or 4 days before the war broke out. It was very timely. And now the war is approaching a 6-month mark. A lot of people here in the US are curious, wondering where it's going to go. The feeling is a lot of materiel is getting into place and the counteroffensive should start. August historically has been a very bad month for the Russians, if you're superstitious. So let's hope that happens. Andy, let me just quickly introduce everybody. Dan Bilak, who I first knew, well, he's a lawyer, long-term, Canadian. He is the senior counsel for Kinstellar in Kyiv and was very active promoting Ukraine through UkraineInvest, the state investment promotion agency. Andy Bain has been in American, retired colonel, been in the US, been in Kyiv for about 30 years, running one of the largest ad agencies, and founder of the Ukrainian Freedom Foundation, which raises money to supply key material to the men and women fighting for Ukraine. And Andrii Osadchuk is from the Golos or Voice Party, and he's trained, I think, at Travshashenko, and has had a very outspoken role as a good, strong English speaker, talking to British radio and other outlets representing Ukraine. As I understand it, and I can't tell from your backgrounds, all three of you are in Kyiv or Kyiv region, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, good.
Correct.
Great. Dan, get me your thoughts on where things are going. And I do want to hear about your lawsuit blocking the turbine that you filed yesterday. But tell us from your outlook, it's been a long 6 months, 5.5 months. What are you predicting for the next few weeks? Where are things going?
Well, I think that, the prediction is still the one that I think many people were making a while ago, is that if we get the right type of equipment in the time that we need it, we will win. And I think that's been the calculation all along. I mean, I was really surprised leading up to the war with all this talk about Ukraine is going to fold in 3 days and 72 hours. I mean, that was clear to anybody who lived here that was not going to happen. We've been at war for 8 years with the Russians, and we know how to fight them. So the question was, were we going to get enough kit and the right kind of kit to be able to do that? And that seems to be coming in. It's probably maybe not coming in as fast as we'd like, but it is coming in. And I was just talking with Andy earlier about the fact that the HIMARS have seemed to make a substantial difference in the very brief period that they've been on the field. I think we've been watching fireworks displays as they blow up Russian supply and ammunition depots in southern Ukraine. So I mean, really, the key thing, Jim, is for the West not to lose focus, and that we maintain the sanctions, a very robust, even stronger sanctions policy. We have to degrade Vladimir Putin's ability to wage war. Our troops have just had a horrific last 2 months, withstanding the barrage of bombings that they've put up with, the artillery that they've had to face in the Donbass, and we've suffered heavy losses. And but the Russians are in trouble as well. And I think Andy can probably talk to that a little better than I can.
Yep.
And if we hold on to the sanctions and we don't do backsliding like Canada seems to have done, then I think we have a good chance in the next, hopefully, I mean, I don't know, by the end of the year, beginning of next year, to be in a position where we've taken back most of our land.
Yeah, Dan, good. Let's get back to turbine a little later. Andy, Dan appropriately mentioned that the first 3 days were obviously miscalled by the Western press and Western analysts, and the first 2 months were quite glorious. Now, as Dan just mentioned, the last 2 months have been really rough on Ukrainian troops on the front lines. This kind of Soviet-style artillery barrage that they've been subjected to. Are we entering a new phase? Has the Ukrainian military, are they adapting? Have they learned lessons from the experience in the Donbass? What are you predicting?
I'd say it's tough to predict. A lot of it's going to be strategic, from a Ukrainian perspective. I think you're seeing heavy casualties. You're seeing a lot of troops rush to the front without adequate training. Ukraine, there are a number of people who probably should be investigated and fired or put in jail for malfeasance in terms of preparation or conduct. The bright side of all that is the Russians are faring even worse and are in a much worse situation than the Ukrainians. I think I do think the current front is going to stalemate. I don't think the Russians have the resources to push much further than they are. They might try something more in the east, but they're really kind of spent, I think. I do think the Ukrainians are going to go on a counteroffensive at some point. Going on a counteroffensive is much more difficult than defending. It's easy to put 10 guys out there with a couple of javelins and put them in groups and spread them across and wait. Coordinating artillery fire and air support in a mass offensive is a little more sophisticated, and I think they'll be able to pull it off. I think, like Dan said, they need a lot more weapons to do that, and they're in a time crunch against the fall. So, if you're looking at the current tactical situation, I think we'll see a stalemate probably until early September, and then possibly an attempt at an offensive of some sort going forward.
Yeah. Andrii, you're often representing Ukraine to the wider world. Are you worried? How worried are you that the US, EU, UK, especially with the departure of Boris Johnson, this US, UK, EU coalition could start to fracture?
So first of all the picture is developing based on expectations. Unfortunately, even in the early March, it was absolutely clear for me and for many people in Kyiv that enthusiasm went down in 3, maximum 4 months, and that's exactly what we see now. One of my friends today paid my attention on Guardian, I think, and the news about war in Ukraine just in the bottom of the page. So there are a lot of other important news, and that's very good indication that the West is losing interest, and it's not because the West is bad. That's probably because humans are. I'm here. Yeah, not because the West is bad, but because the humans in the West, they're organized on that way that they used to some kind of serial. And after 10 or 15, series, so they want something more. So that's why definitely a lot of depend on leadership. a lot of depend on leaders who shall deliver not only good news but bad news too. Yes, the possible stepping down of Boris Johnson, it's probably some kind of problem for Ukraine, but we rely on the decisions which have been already made. And my assessment that the bads are so high, really high, after giving Ukraine the association status, after NATO summit, which proclaimed Russia as the main threat to civilized world. And after all the statements from United States, from United Kingdom on support and standing with Ukraine, that we believe that Ukraine will receive enough resources to continue not only resistance, but as correctly our colleague said, that we need to counter offense. So we need to push them back. And I think the last week, especially, the last week clearly showed that we were right from the very, very beginning, because myself and other people were saying that duration of this war is directly linked to the readiness of the West to provide us with modern story. And we know why these delays happened. And by the way, I very much thank you for Boris Johnson, who said in the parliament that yes, we were late, but now we start not only receiving good weapons, we demonstrate that we can use these weapons very efficiently.
Yeah, a couple quick points on that, Andrii. Thank you. Andy, are you seeing the HIMARS? And I think that big explosion outside of Kherson Airport was probably attributed to HIMAR. I think there may be 10 in the country. Max Boot had a very influential column in the Washington Post last day or two, suggesting that really Ukraine needs 60 to get over the top. In many places where you served in Iraq and Afghanistan, there have been non-DoD contract employees who might be able to jumpstart the process. Obviously, the Ukrainians are perfectly smart enough to learn how to use a HIMAR, but it takes 6 months to do, 6 weeks. Are you seeing any sign that the U.S. will speed things up by sending in contractors who can do this kind of work?
Now, it's interesting, Jim, that the U.S. is doing very little in that regard. I've learned that the British now have, I think, 3 general officers working in Kyiv with the general staff. The Americans have nobody. Even the embassy, I'm told, each section only is allowed 1 person. So there's only 1 military officer in the country for the embassy, and they have to stay on the embassy grounds, is what I was told by the Ukrainian counterparts. And saying AID has 1 person. It's interesting why the U.S. is doing so little, and there's speculation that perhaps they want to drag the war out. You see Biden blaming every problem in America on Russia, and it makes good copy, I guess, for him to have something to blame. But there's a lot of logistics problems on the U.S. side. I saw a chart just 2 days ago that showed of military aid committed. Britain had delivered almost 90%. Other countries were 90 to 100%. U.S. was at 40%. And so at some point you get bureaucratic problems in logistics, but the president can step in, the White House can step in and say, make it happen. No one's doing that. And it seems they're delaying things for a certain reason, and it may be gross incompetence, and maybe politics, I don't know, but it's embarrassing to see how the United States has reacted in that capacity.
Right. One quick follow-up. You mentioned the word fall. How does the weather impact offensive, counteroffensives? I mean, the ground does freeze around November, and it's easier to move around. It's obviously very unpleasant, bitterly cold, but what sort of stop the fighting? Will the weather stop the fighting through Christmas?
It'll make resupply more difficult. It will not have significant impact. It won't have significant impact if you're not the guy on the ground. If you're the guy on the ground, it makes it a lot more miserable. But the fall moisture will make treaded vehicles more difficult to get over the fields. But I don't think it should impact ongoing operations.
Right. Dan, going back to and what Andrii was talking about, so the geopolitics. Yesterday, I understand you filed a lawsuit against the Canadian government, asking them not to send that repaired or replacement turbine to Gazprom to get Nord Stream 1 up and running. In terms of strategy, isn't that a mistake? Because we want at least the gas, the Germans get enough gas to get through the winter. Obviously, Putin is twisting the EU arms behind their back with high gas prices. And if Nord Stream 2 has an excuse not to pump, Germany and Europe is screwed, essentially.
I don't know that that's entirely true. From everything that I understand is that there are alternatives, including through the Ukrainian gas pipeline, for which the Russians are paying, even though they're not using it because they have a take or pay contract. There are other alternatives that can be used. I mean, the Germans need the gas now to fill their reservoirs. That's my understanding, and there are other ways of doing this. Look, I feel sorry for the German people. I mean, they are suffering from abject reality of failed German policy towards Russia over the past 10 years, both by Chancellor Schrader and Chancellor Merkel. But frankly, you know, I'm worried about my own head and the heads of Ukrainians. And every penny, every cent that goes to Gazprom to pay for gas being pumped into Germany is going to rain death and rockets down on my head and those of the people that I serve with. I'm a member of the Territorial Defense Forces here. You know, I'm working with Andy and the Ukraine Freedom Fund to try to get training for these guys who are going out without the proper training. And you know, they need every advantage that they can. But that's one aspect. There's another, far, in my view, a much more important aspect, and it was really laid out very, very cogently by President Zelensky when he said that, look, you know, all this means is that Putin is now going to double down and blackmail you even more. I mean, you know, to say that, well, if we don't get this turbine back, we're not going to be able to pump gas is not entirely accurate, because there are like 6 or 7 turbines. And then he sees, oh, everybody's caved in. They're prepared to do to make exceptions to the sanctions. So what else do I do to get even more sanctions removed? How do I undermine the sanctions policy even more? It's a thin edge of the wedge, and I get the politics behind it from a Western, you know, let's help each other type of thing. But I don't think that anybody's really looking at alternatives. They're looking at the easiest way.
Yeah, Dan, thanks. Yeah, and also on the gas subject, as you probably know, Naftogaz, the state gas company, is apparently not going to make a payment, which could put it in default. I mean, how do you see the fact that, you know, there's $300 billion in Russian reserves frozen somewhere, and the Western world is letting Naftogaz default, which would imply having to renegotiate all the debt when we see the end of the tunnel here?
Yeah, it's an abomination. Ukraine should not be made to pay for and have its credit rating eviscerated and to be suffering economically because it was invaded by Russia. I mean, I would have expected, you know, there's a lot of creative people in Western capitals that can figure out things like gas logistics. They can figure out issues like I mean, Ukraine needs $5 to $7 billion a month, euros a month to meet its payments. You know, Germany bailed out Greece at 200 billion euros, which represented 2% of the European economy during the Greek crisis. So, I mean, when there's a will, there's a way. And as you said, there is 300 million sitting in the kitty. I mean, if Gazprom forces a default of Ukrainian sovereign rating, because they do these things on a consolidated basis, I think it's an abomination.
Yeah,
and you know, I would expect a much more leadership, both from the EU on as well as Canada and the United States on this issue.
Yeah. Great. Andrii, you've been quoted a fair amount in the British press. The latest story, I think it's also moved on Reuters, is that some of the arms may be leaking into some Eastern European black market. Having lived in Ukraine for 6 years, I'm a little hazy if there really is an Eastern European arms black market. But have you looked at this story? Do you think it's that credible? Is this part of the fracturing of support, undermining of support in the West that we may be seeing?
I think it's very clear for everyone that Putin underestimated the readiness of the West to support Ukraine. That's absolutely clear. They were saying this even before the war. If you remember the quotation from Medvedev, who was referring to invasion to Georgia, and he was saying that, oh, at that time there were some minor sanctions, so this time we supposed to survive. So meaning that all this strong help to Ukraine, and especially military help of Ukraine, is very, very much unexpected for Kremlin, and definitely it creates a lot of problem for them. I don't want to comment, the details of internal policy in Washington. I agree with Andy a lot, but we know that without American and Western supplies, we would lose this war already. But for the moment, we're winning, and I'm saying that we're winning the second war, because the original war, which was prepared by Putin and which was started in February 24th, which was planned for 10 days or 15 days, that war was already lost by Kremlin in full. So this war, which we have now, it's a kind of another war with another tactics, with another strategy, and so on and so forth. But Western military supply is critical for us and is very dangerous for Putin. That's why I'm sure that Kremlin invest all their resources which they have in the West. And these resources are huge because during decades, they were paying money to journalists, to political parties, to public activists, to everyone around. And what they do now, they want to create rumors which may damage this partnership with this anti-Putin coalition. Based on my knowledge, I don't know any information which may confirm any problems with military supplies, especially if we are talking about weapons. Yes, some kind of humanitarian aid was not distributed properly because, sorry, Ukraine is a big country. It's a huge mess in local management and so on and so forth. But as a first deputy head of law enforcement committee of the parliament, I have zero confirmed information on any leakage of Western military assistance. So I want everyone in the West clearly understand that we are doing our best to control everything what we receive. And I think everyone understands that Putin and the FSB is really doing their best to create more chaos as possible in the West.
Yeah, Andrii, thank you. I'd like to open up the question to all three of you, Andrii, Andy, and Dan, about the possibility of partisan warfare. In talks about Ukraine and speeches about Ukraine here in the US, I've often cited the statistic that from 44 to 1954, more Soviet security personnel were killed in Western Ukraine than during the decade in Afghanistan, which is a fact. As you know, after the 2014 invasion of Russia of Ukraine, there have been a whole series of movies basically glorifying the UPA and the OUN on partisan warfare. I'm sort of waiting for it to start. There's been a few assassinations in the occupied areas in Kherson. I open up to all three of you. Do you see this as potentially starting up, or are people waiting for a prospect of liberation before they make their move? What is happening on the partisan warfare front?
I mean, Joe, I'd say, the two items there, organic growth of the party, ground up partisans, people who live out, in occupied territories, just taking arms up by themselves. And I think you'll see that happen. But I think the Ukrainian Special Forces Command have also developed a fairly sophisticated partisan warfare plan themselves to instigate partisan warfare and infiltrate people. So I think, no matter how you define it, you will see, I think, more increasingly and effective activity in Russian areas, including sabotage, assassination, interference with supplies, coupled with the further reach of HIMARS artillery. So I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the Russians to maintain occupation.
Okay, just to follow up on that, Andy, once again, do you think people in the US and the West might see some sort of breakthrough in Kherson this summer and late July, August, where the Russian lines will be ruptured, Russians units may be isolated from Crimea resupply? Do you see the prospect of that kind of breakthrough?
I see that prospect in the future. I can't say how quickly.
Yeah. And just to keep with you, Andy, you mentioned that you thought that the war had been poorly managed by some individuals. As you may recall, about 18 months ago, I went down to southern Kherson, Skadovsk, Oresky Sands, and we all know, history tells us that narrow isthmus into Crimea, even the Red Army didn't try to go through there. They marched across the swamps. Why did the Ukrainian army allow the Russians to roll out of Crimea on that very narrow isthmus that could have been cut? And I'll just add one quick thing. I've been several times to the DMZ between the two Koreas. Things there are so simple that you have 10 tons of concrete. It just takes putting a little hand grenade and the concrete block falls down and blocks the highway. As I could see, nothing was done. And I had friends who were down there with the OSC and others, and they saw very little preparation for what was sort of a no-brainer, that the Russians would roll out of Crimea and into Kherson.
If I was down in Kherson, south of the Dnieper, last April, last May, and the highway, between Kherson and Novokhovka, south of the river, is as good a highway as I've seen anywhere in the world. And there's similar accounts of the highway between Belgorod, Russia, and Konotop and Sumy being, extremely well resurfaced recently. There have been allegations that it's clearly someone in government has been very supportive of creating good entries, good approaches for Russian troops. So I think you see that people in the Ukrainian government has been infiltrated by Russian intelligence, and decisions were made and resources allocated to facilitate that. And I think the Ukrainians have a fair amount to do in cleaning house and identifying why these roads were built, why certain things were done. There have been allegations made about certain officials that are not people maybe not paying enough attention to. Maybe they will later on. But Russian intelligence is a cancer, and it's difficult. I sympathize with the administration or with honest Ukrainian politicians who are trying to get rid of it, because it's everywhere, and you never know who you can trust or what their motives are. But clearly, there's been collaboration with key senior officials in facilitating those.
Well, there was awareness of this problem. I remember when I was writing about the highway projects, the Ukraine did not want to go accept a $50 million loan from Hungary to upgrade the roads into Uzhhorod, because basically all roads led to Budapest, all bridges led to Budapest, and they saw this as a potential security issue to allow the Hungarians to come in at 100 kilometers an hour. But that's something to look back, Monday morning quarterbacking, what did happen. On these two topics, partisan warfare, breakthrough, Dan, Andrii, do you have thoughts?
I can just confirm that the information which was publicly spread that Zelensky ordered to liberalize Kherson, it's official confirmation of the plans which are under development. So now it's not a secret anymore. And we see the possibilities to liberalize Kherson. And definitely, I think that it will be a breaking point in this campaign.
It's kind of been interesting. I mean, you have this romanticism around partisans and guerrillas and guerrilla warfare. It's actually, if we end up in a partisan warfare, it's a pretty bad situation, because it means our army has been destroyed. But to this point in time, it's been very interesting, because you have this whole circle around Melitopol where all of this stuff the reports first surfaced. And it seems to be, maybe, just from the reports, it seems to be spreading, taking out, as the Russians have appointed what they call Gauleiters, the local collaborators, and and then their cars blow up, the entrance ways to their apartment buildings blow up, and people get shot in cafes. I mean, it's straight out of movies. But now it's happening in Donetsk and in Luhansk and other places. And I don't think it's an accident that those bases, the HIMARS are highly accurate, but you got to give them the right coordinates and things. So I think there's a lot going on, and I think Andy, my impression, Andy's closer to it than I am, I'm sure, but I think that the point he made is right, that this is not a devil come what may type of situation. This is highly organized, highly coordinated as part of a plan, and I suspect that as the offensive rolls out, whenever that will be, especially in the south, I think you'll see that taking a more role. And you look at the population. I mean, I think this is really the story of this war, has been the consolidation of the Ukrainian people around total warfare, total resistance. The Russians have had very, very bad, almost no traction in all of these Russification and integration objectives and everything else that they've started, because people are actually even being passive aggressive. They're just saying, we're not playing ball. We're not showing up. We're not going to take your humanitarian aid. We're not going to take your passports. And that, coupled with getting shot is quite a detriment, and it plays with their heads. And there's a big psychological warfare that's going on right now. And the HIMARS are now a new phase of that. So I think this works on multiple levels.
Yeah, Andrii?
If you allow me a short comment about weather, because Andrew was talking about weather, and definitely all Russians' war during last, I think, 200 years was won or lost because of weather. And in fact, they already miscalculated weather, because thanks for global warming. So even you remember in last December, everyone was saying that yes, attack is possible in February. Why February is clear, because usually February is the coldest month in Ukraine, but this February there was no frost. The rivers were not in the ice. So and that in the north of Kyiv, because there was no ice on the river.
Andrii, we're losing you a little bit.
That it is impossible to.
Yeah. Andrii, let me move on the conversation. Could you disconnect and reconnect, and you might get a better connection? And yeah, just on the partisan warfare, I think, we've all plunked down our $5 and sat in a movie and watched a heroic film of the French Maquis, Resistance, or the UPA, and then you go on and have dinner somewhere. It's a lot tougher when you have to really bite the bullet and plan out an assassination or a car bombing or something. And let's see if people go beyond the romanticizing to doing the very unpleasant actions that are needed. A lot of concern, especially in Middle East and North Africa, about all the Black Sea ports being blockaded. And I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you think that is Odessa from the land still at threat? And if no, what are the prospects for opening up the ports? There's been the UN, the Turks, a lot of people involved in trying to set up some sort of humanitarian shipping corridor in and out. This has gone nowhere. You can't stop the grain. It's being harvested now. What are the prospects for getting the ports open by the end of August, let's say?
Well, maybe I'll kick off. I mean, actually, the grain, some of it's starting to move. I mean, we've been sending a lot of, it's not quite the capacity and the volumes that generally get sent down to Odessa, but a lot of it has been going overland into Romania. And once we liberated that hunk of rock that's now famous around the world as Snake Island, we have all of a sudden you got these cluster of of ships that have come into Constanza and into the Danube Delta to start trying to get this stuff out. So that is one solution. But the overall issue, and I think you're right to raise this, Jim, is that without ports, we really don't have an economy, and the ports are an absolute lifeline for us, at least to have Odessa port open, and hence I think that I think that the offensive is really going to be there as to push them back and to allow us at least to get control of this. But it's still going to be, if we aren't able to liberate Crimea at this point, for example, then we still have a very severe security situation that where and no matter what agreement the Russians sign, as Bismarck said, it's not worth the paper it's written on. I mean, if their lips are moving, they're basically lying. We're dealing with a terrorist state, and that weaponizes everything, and including food, notwithstanding 400 million people rely on Ukrainian grain. So the answer has always been an escort of warships. I mean, there's no reason why NATO could not do this. At some point, you got to start calling Putin's bluff on a lot of the things that he does, and he's been proven to back down in many cases. I mean, he just backed down by in front of the Kazakhs, where he cut off their gas, and they just said, "Yeah, we're no big deal. We're going to go a different way." And he let the gas go. So we have NATO countries in the Black Sea, Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, that could provide a shipping corridor to get Ukrainian wheat and other products out. It's a matter of the political will to do this. And if we don't, you're creating another bad precedent, that you're basically agreeing that the Black Sea is Putin's bathtub. It's his lake, and these are international waters.
Yeah. And obviously, he wants it to be a Russian sea, a Russian lake, and the Turks obviously do not want that. So, and there would have to be, and then 3 NATO countries again are Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. And there'd have to be a NATO escort, because if you leave it up to private insurers, Lloyd's of London will charge twice the value of the cargo to get it from the Bosphorus to Odessa and back. So you really have to have some sort of government guarantee. Any thoughts on this, Andy, about any land threat to Odessa?
I don't think Odessa's under much threat. I know there's activity down there. I was at a dinner last night, and someone talked about reports from their family about Skadovsk seeing a lot of activity for some reason, but the Russians have made several attempts at the amphibious demonstrations toward Odessa and several approaches. But the Bug River and Nikolaev are a fairly overwhelming obstacle for land connectivity, and the Russians have demonstrated no skill at amphibious warfare. So and even if they were to get it amphibiously, the logistics behind supplying it would be very difficult. So I'm not too worried about Odessa in that capacity.
There's a history there that there's a artificial fort in the middle of the mouth of the Dnipro between, I guess, Kherson and maybe his Mykolaiv regions. And our U.S. Navy hero, John Paul Jones, was hired out to, I think, Catherine the Great, and helped defeat the Turks there. So there's a long history of trying to control the mouth of the Dnipro River, and how crucial it is. Another thought, and maybe I'll throw this by you, Andrii. Kissinger, as you know, came out at Davos suggesting some sort of land for peace deal. Kissinger doesn't have a great track record with peace talks, since he did peace talks with North Vietnamese, and then North Vietnamese marched into Saigon a year later. So be careful about getting into peace talks with Henry Kissinger's seal of approval. But there is a certain school of thought, maybe the isolationist wing of the Republican Party and the left wing of the Democratic Party, who say, well, gee, this isn't our fight. Let's just give them the Donbass, and we can sign a deal and get everything back to so-called normal. How do you think Ukrainian public opinion looks on the idea of land for peace, and could Zelensky ever even sell that to the Ukrainian public opinion?
First of all, I think that the old Republican Kissinger, he doesn't like young Democrat Biden. So that's why I think they continue this long-term confrontation between Republicans and Democrats, and Kissinger definitely use any opportunity, you know, to stick administration. Definitely, there were a lot of these voices, not only in the United States, but partially in Europe, especially in France and Germany. And I'm personally fighting with this very dangerous word ceasefire, because for the last couple of months, I strongly believe that the only beneficiary of ceasefire is Putin. Because as we discuss even now in our video call, it's understood that Russia has a lot of problems with this campaign, and they would be happy to have a break, but with keeping territories which they temporarily occupy. For us, it's absolutely unacceptable. As from tactical point of view, I mean, from the military point of view, as definitely from political point of view, because we understand well that this salami approach is one of the favorite tactics of Russians. So to slide territories piece by piece, and if we froze the conflict, there is zero doubts that the Russians will come back again, and we will lose again the parts of Ukraine. So that's why I think we went so far in this war now, that now this war cannot be stopped. And that's another very risky word, because I think this war can be or won or lose. So there is no middle, you know, for this war. And I think the public opinion in Ukraine is exactly on this direction. So we are ready to fight, and we demonstrate this on the daily basis. And I think Zelensky is smelling the air very good. He understands that it is impossible to even open the mouth for any compromises or so-called compromises. And I think it was very well delivered to our European allies. You remember this visit of Macron, Scholz, and Italian friends. And now everybody knows the secret that the original plan was not just to visit Irpin and Bucha, but they were probably was trying to find some model of stopping this war. But Zelensky was very straight to them, and that's exactly the reflection of emotions in Kyiv and in Ukraine, that we are not going to trade, we are not going to negotiate with Russia until we will not liberalize our territories. Definitely there is a point on which stage of liberalization we're ready to open negotiations. Zelensky was several times referring to the borders of the February 24, but I have a lot of doubts, because if we will be able to push them back to the borders of February 24, it will mean that we will be able to push them even further. So at the moment, I think no peace talks are possible. The only things which is happening, as you discussed previously, is a grain issue. And I will add a little bit, if you allow me 2 more minutes, that today, in fact, the negotiations was, the next round of negotiations was completed. And few vessels, I think, already will be loaded. And in fact, partial deblocking of Odessa port is happening now. But I think we need to look at this as a bigger picture, because there is problem of grain, which we currently have in Ukraine. And all the stories, by the way, about land trafficking of the grain has not much sense, because the experts were saying that we need from 5 to 6 years to take all the grain which we currently have in Ukraine by trucks. So meaning that it is impossible. But for me, it's the biggest concern of the grain of this season. So that's why now it's very dangerous political game with unblocking of Ukrainian ports with the grain of the previous season, because we need to guarantee that we will be able to deliver the grain of this season in 2023. So that's why the story is even more complex than one may think.
Yeah, it's very clear that Putin is using gas and grain as blackmail commodities against the Europeans and against essentially the third world. Slightly different topic, sort of a footnote, which Americans often don't quite focus on, which is your northern neighbor, Belarus. Do you think that Lukashenko will continue sort of sitting on the fence, letting the Russians use his country as a platform for the war, but not involving Belarusian soldiers? What's your sense on where the Belarus situation is going?
I had conversations with contacts I have in the border guards, and they tell me that they don't see the formation of any significant attack groups that would signal a massive invasion by Russian or a mixture of Russian Belarus forces. I think politically it's pretty clear that Lukashenko is walking the tightrope of his life, literally right now, because there is apparently zero appetite in Belarus society, in Belarus army, let alone Belarus society, for a war in Ukraine. They saw what was in their hospitals coming from Kyiv, in and around Kyiv, and the kind of shape the Russian soldiers were in. When they were going into Belarus hospitals. My bigger concern, and of course you've got all the swamps and everything else. We talked about land. I mean, it's just not an easy terrain to get across. But by continuing to do these exercises and war games and things like that, he does tie up troops that we could be using on our 2,500 kilometer front line that we have to keep in the north. And my biggest fear is from the air, because you hear reports of more and more rockets coming into Belarus and bombers and AWACS planes and things like that. And it's an open question: where are those going to be used, and what are they going to be supporting? The checkpoints around Kyiv have tightened up considerably. And it's not quite as easy to get in and out of the city as it was two and a half weeks ago. So I think that people are taking the threat seriously, and the authorities are. But so long as Lukashenko's in power, I think that he understands that if he invaded, used his armed forces, that he'd be finished.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. He depends on Putin for his job. On the other hand, if he does what Putin wants him to do, he would then definitely lose his job. So he's trying to find a middle path. Yeah. By the way, Dan, Andy, Andrii, what's life like in Kyiv today? Are the restaurants open? Are some of the restaurants open? Is there people
It's raining.
running?
Life is pretty good. The restaurants, you got the 11 o'clock curfew and you got less traffic. Other than that, day to day, I haven't seen much different from a year ago. It's a lot different from 3 months ago, but it's improved. And I don't know how many people are back, but I'm guessing 75%. It's other than having to take a train to Warsaw to get out of the country, and having a curfew. For night owls like yourself, Jim, it's not much different.
All the
probably
closed. Yeah, so it sounds like I hate to say it, but it's not a good comparison, but it's better than the first lockdown when you could have taken a nap on Krashatik, and the town was really shut down in March of 2021. Well, that's good. This is the Overseas Press Club of America. I mean, you guys are on the front lines. What is your sense of the, we got George here, the press coverage that you've read, and you're sitting there scrolling the internet, reading New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, FT. What are you thinking? What's your critique on what the reporters are doing here?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to just come back to circle around to something Andrii raised earlier about the sort of the lack of attention that Ukraine is getting. I'm not super fussed about that, because I think it's normal. These things ebb and flow. The reasons for the direct, the intense interest in Ukraine at that time and getting on the front pages. I wouldn't want to be a part of that again, with the rockets coming into Kyiv and threats of invasion and things like that. I think that the ebb will pick up once the counteroffensives start. Once there are significant newsworthy things to report on. I mean, stalemates aren't fun and they get boring after a while. And you look at bombed out building after bombed out building after a certain point in time. Unfortunately, I suspect that Western audiences get desensitized. So it's just the society we live in. But we'll make it interesting for people again. I'm sure. I think the reporting overall, Jim, to your question, has been. I mean, I think reporters have gotten an education. I mean, they can now find Ukraine on a map of Ukraine, and know a little bit more about their history. They know that Ukrainians are not Russians. They know that Russia, in fact, didn't exist until Peter turned it into an empire. It was Muscovy before that, and these are all important these are all important things, and it changes perspective in people's minds. There are some good reports, there are some bad reports, but I think overall, I've been pretty pleased.
Well, as obviously,
if you allow me very shortly, because I think that's important. Following to what Daniel is saying, and I think it's important for journalist society and professional society in America to understand. I believe that we won communication war during first 4 months. So, and that's important result. So we were able to deliver our messages. We were able to deliver information. Probably it was the first war which was covered in so many details because of huge amount of digital content, because our military, everyone is with cell phones, with good cameras, a lot of drones which are making a lot of videos. So all this flow on the information which was delivered to the West, I think create a quite positive picture for Ukraine. And I think it creates that wave of pressure from the citizens on the leadership in UK, in France, in Germany, in the United States partially. And this pressure from society, in fact, forced the leaders to act. So that's why I think this part of the war, from communication point of view, was quite successful for Ukraine.
Yeah. And it's really quite amazing. I'm here in New England, and you can drive 5 miles and see 5 Ukrainian flags. The depth and the bipartisan support for Ukraine is quite deep. And you get occasionally cranky people. I was at a luncheon party, and the guy was ranting at me that Zelensky's one of the richest people in the world. And I said, I don't know where you got that, but
RT.
What's that?
RT.
Yeah, you're right, RT. Andrii, you're from a different political party. What's your assessment of Zelensky, and how is he holding up?
Look, before February 24, there were a lot of questions to his team, first of all, and some of these questions are still valid, but I strongly understand that as soon as we will continue any internal political battles, which is normal, by the way, for any democratic society, we simply will help Putin to win. So that's why I prefer to be constructive, and I definitely agree that communication is extremely important in modern world. And Zelensky is very good in communication. That's his job, to speak, and he can speak quite good. Maybe not everyone likes how he speaks in Ukrainian, because it's not a secret that originally he is a Russian-speaking guy, but he's a professional actor and he learned very fast. So for the 3 years of his presidency, he speaks absolutely ideal Ukrainian, plus the language which he uses is extremely correct. And I'm sure that all his messages to different parliaments in the world, and I think it's not unprecedented in the history. I don't think that any presidents in the world ever had so many statements and so many remarks to, I think, hundreds of parliaments in the world. And I think it played a very significant role in consolidation of the West, of Western political elite. And from this point, I think he's doing quite a good job. For sure, there are thousands of details here, like in any complex projects, which anyone may criticize. But I want all of us work together, because I have one life, I have one Ukraine, and I want to win this war. So that's why I'm on the same side of barricade with the Ukrainian leadership for the moment.
Good. Yeah, Andrii, as we know, Zelensky's talked to the UN, he's talked to the US Congress, he's talked to the Bundestag, he's even talked to the Portuguese Parliament. I mean, he's really covered all the bases, as we say in American English. Do you see that, I guess he's giving sort of a TV fireside chat every night. Is he running out of steam? Is he, obviously he needs a vacation, but you know, the war isn't going to give him a vacation. Is he holding up?
He looks to be in a good shape.
What do you guys think, Andy, Dan?
The guy's stamina is unbelievable, frankly. I mean, he does this every single day. He talks to the Ukrainian people. He gives them a pep talk. He tries to lay it out the way it is. He's very blunt. Clearly, there are things he can't tell us, but I think that there is certainly from everybody I know, there is no complaint about the level of communication from the president, and I think that they've done a great job in that regard. Yeah,
great, Andy.
Yeah, no, I think he's doing a good job.
Good. We're trying to keep to the mark. We got another couple of minutes. Maybe just quickly go around the robin and see if any final comments to sort of the international press audience of the world. Where Ukraine is going? Andy, you've got your little green light on.
Okay, I didn't turn the green light on, but I'll chat for you. I think it's important. We're looking at it from a Ukrainian perspective, but from a Russian perspective, this whole what we're calling a war is only an operational campaign in a larger strategy. And I think as far as the Russians are concerned, the world and the United States is concerned, at least, it's a massive failure as an operational campaign, which is going to grossly undermine their national strategy. It's shown the Russians to be extremely weak militarily, and it's going to damage them, cripple them economically, ultimately, and alienate them. And the regime, it may bring the regime down ultimately. So I think from that standpoint, the war is, as far as Russia is concerned, the war is lost in that regard. And as far as the United States has won, and it's just a matter of how much Ukraine is going to have to pay for that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just a quick thing, I mean, if you're the head of procurement for the Indian Army, do you want to buy more of these special pop-top tanks?
You think China's looking, more hungrily at Taiwan right now?
Hopefully not. Dan, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think that, we need the West to keep the faith. And, I'm asked, how far will Putin go and how long will it take? And I said, it's up to you. And it really is. We've all talked about that. We need to understand we're dealing not with a country who is an aggressor. We're dealing with a terrorist state. And you can't appease terrorists. We need to deal with Putin the way, the United States deal with IDIL ISIS. These people need to be beaten back. They need to be defeated. And all means necessary need to be deployed. And this is why, issues like the gas turbine, it's not about a gas turbine. It's about the fact that we've, first time that Canada has been challenged on its sanctions policy, robust sanctions policy, it issued a waiver. And, I get all the arguments, but I'm really concerned that if this starts, Canada is Ukraine's BFF in all of the major international fora. And God forbid that other countries start chipping away. Putin will be all over it like a dirty shirt, and we will have, and the Ukrainians will pay. We will die, and we will fight. And we'll have to fight longer.
Yeah, got it, Andrii.
I definitely sign off everything what Daniel is saying, and that's important for entire West to understand that totalitarian Russian regime was poisoning the entire world democracy and entire world safety and security for decades. Unfortunately, now it's time for everyone to open the eyes and to pay, because during decades, the West was artificially blind. And even if you look back in 1991, we did a lot of mistake. I mean, the democratic West did a lot of mistake, because my theory that Soviet Union did not collapse, because Soviet Union, it was not just the formal unity of 15 republics. No, it was empire which was artificially divided into like regions, which was called republic. But Soviet Union stayed alive. And because KGB empire stayed alive, everything were in its place. And just the investments from the West, the business from the West, make it possible, you know, to blooming again this fascist regime, which now absolutely identical to everything what was in Soviet Union in 1930s or 1940s. So that's why now we shall play this game till the end. We shall not afraid to imagine the world map without modern Russia. It's absolutely possible. We all here are quite adult gentlemen, and I think everyone remember June, July 1991. No one even was able to imagine then in 6 months Soviet Union as a group of 15 republics will cease to exist, right? No one thought that it is possible, but it happened. I think Russia is much, much weaker than anyone may think. Yes, they have nukes, that's clear, but Soviet Union also had a nukes. So that's why I think we shall be brave, we shall not be afraid, and we shall play this game till the end.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Andrii, Andy, and Dan. It's really been useful to our members, and this will be posted on the OPC website. It's been recorded. And Patty, do you want to say some final words? You've researched.
Yes. Well, I would just like to thank you, Jim, for initiating the program and moderating it, and all the panelists. And as you said, we'll have a text recap and links on our website and in the next couple days. So thanks to all of you for a very interesting
Thank you.
program. Take
Love
care.
Ukraine.
Good luck.